We're talking today with David Lowe of Wayland, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay. Now, David, begin with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
Well, I was born in Hebron, Illinois, on a farm that my dad worked at the time. Well, actually, I was born in the town, but my dad was a hired hand at a farm. There's a big farming community there, a big milk producer in that at that era.
And what year were you born?
In 1927.
Okay.
October 29th, 1927. So that makes me 93 years old right now.
I can safely say that you don't look it. So, all right. So you were on a dairy farm. Now, did your family own the farm?
No. My dad was a hired hand on the farm, and he got it at that time what they called milk fever. Milking cows, his hands would swell up. Now, that's the story that I got. I'm not sure how true it is, but that's what I was always led to believe. Okay. So he could not work on the farm anymore, and his wife at the time was Irene Lowe, and her father owned a celery farm in Muskegon. And that was just before the Depression started. So he decided that he would come out and work on the celery farm because he couldn't work in the dairy industry anymore. So they moved to Muskegon. I was not very old. I couldn't have been over 18 months old maybe or something, but we moved in, and then he worked on the farm for a little while, but then the Depression hit. And my father-in-law, or my grandfather, my mother's dad, couldn't afford to hire him. But at that time, they started to get some oil in Muskegon, drilling oil wells. And so my dad got a job in the oil field, and worked in the oil field at that time. Sometimes he worked and didn't get paid either. So it was pretty tough when we were kids. We grew up pretty poor, but we didn't know we were poor, and we had a good time. I had a good childhood. I can't say anything bad about my childhood at all.
Okay. How many kids were in the family?
There was 4.
And where were you in the order?
I was 3. I have an older brother who was in the Marine Corps, and then I have a sister that's 2 years older than I am. My brother's 3 years older, and my sister's 2 years older than myself, and then I have a younger sister, 8 years younger than I am.
Okay.
And then the oil field kind of played out in Muskegon, and the company that he worked for was Ohio Oil Company, which was transferring some people from Muskegon over to Burnups, and they were discovering oil over in Burnups, so he was transferred over there. And we moved to Burnups for a couple of years, and then the oil field played out there. And he was told that he could either move to Ohio and follow the oil field, or he could lose his job and stay in Michigan. So he lost his job. He didn't want to leave the state. Okay. So then we went from Burnups. He moved to Wayland. That was in 1939.
Okay. Now, in Wayland, was he doing farm work or something else?
No, we happened to move in next door to the construction contractor who was building a new school in Wayland, and now it's called Pine Street School. So he got a job in construction on the Pine Street School.
All right. Now, and so then did you go to high school then in Wayland?
I went to high school in Wayland, yes. Okay. I went, well, the first 2 years, and then my dad passed away in 1940. And so my mother was left with 4 kids, and no really experience on, help of any kind in getting a job, so she had to do manual work. And the war started about that time, and there was an egg plant, what they called an egg plant in Wayland, where they candled eggs, and there was a pet milk company, and what they did is they candled the eggs, they beat them up, and they took them over to the pet milk factory, and they made powdered eggs.
Okay.
So during the war, she made powdered eggs for the service.
All right.
And and I worked there at the pet milk factory. I was only 14 years old, but I got a special permit from the school to work, and we had prisoners of war come over from Finnville. They had a prisoner of war camp over there, German, and they brought them over, and we worked in the plant with the guys.
Okay.
So.
Now, what impression did you have of those prisoners of war?
Very good. They were very nice people. They weren't any different than you and I. We had a little difficulty with the language problem, but we were able to communicate with each other. And they would bring a busload, 2 busloads of prisoners over every day, and we would work in the warehouse, loading cans and milk cartons and things like that. And so that, but they were any different than you and I.
Okay. Did that affect how you thought about the war at all, just to see that the Germans were regular people?
No, not really. I guess I just didn't, wasn't cognizant of the fact that maybe should color my judgment, but it didn't. All I knew was that they seemed no different than what we were.
Okay. Now, to back up just a little bit, do you remember how you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Not really. I remember hearing it on the radio. I don't remember where I was at the time because I was still pretty young yet. But I do remember them on the radio.
Okay. And then you said you had a brother who went into the Marine Corps.
Yes, he went in. I think in '43. I think that he went in Marine Corps. And he went in at 17, and my mother had to sign for him. And he was overseas in all of the Pacific battles, Taiwan, Tinian, Saipan, and
was he just an infantryman, or did
an infantryman? He carried a bazooka for a while,
okay,
and he also carried a flamethrower. That's about the only 2 things that he told me that he about his experience. And one thing he did tell me that's a little bit gruesome. I don't know whether I should say it or not, but anyway, he said on one of the campaigns that they had, he said there were so many dead Japanese that they took a bulldozer, did a great big long trench, and just took a bulldozer and pushed them into the trench and covered them up. That's about the only thing he told me about the service that he was in.
But he did come back in one piece.
Yep, he came back in one piece, and he was not affected by the war at all. He seemed to adjust back to civilian life very easily.
Okay. Now, did you finish high school?
Well, that's another story. At my end of my sophomore year, I decided that I was 17 and I was going to be drafted if I kept on. I decided that I wanted to join the Marine Corps. So at the end of my sophomore year, I talked my mother into signing papers for me to go into the service, and which I did. And I served a year, a little over a year in the service. And when I came back out of the service, I had taken a, a GED in the service, passed my high school exam or diploma, got that. So I went back to the high school, and Mr. Stevie, Rudy Stevie, was the principal or the superintendent of the school. And I asked him if I could get a high school diploma because of what I did in the service. And he said, well, I really can't give you a high school diploma, but he says, I'll tell you what I will do. He said, you missed your junior year. He says, if you maintain a B or better average for your senior year, I will give you credit for your junior year and you can graduate with your class. So I did, and I maintained, matter of fact, I graduated tied to 10th in my class with another gal.
Okay.
And so I did get my high school diploma, only having 3 years of high school.
And you had to do it after the time in the service.
After I got back from the service, yeah.
Was there anybody else in your situation? Were there some returning
Yes,
veterans?
there was about 3. There were 4 other servicemen that started school with me, but they all dropped out, and I'm the only one that completed. So as far as I know, I'm the only veteran that completed high school in Wayland.
Okay, at least in that fashion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, was there a reason why you wanted the diploma and not just the GED? Did it make any difference?
Yes, I felt that later in life that it would be more important to have a sheepskin, as they called it back then, than the service one.
Okay, so let's back up. Let's go back to 1945. You 17 years old, you say, okay, I'm just going to go in the service and do it. And so you talk your mother into signing the papers to let you go in a year early. And so when did you enlist?
July, I think it was July 12th when I went and enlisted. I'm not exactly sure that. I think it was July 12th that I actually was inducted into the service.
Okay. And when you're enlisting, were you able to choose which branch of service to go into?
They said we could, but when we got in line, and the guy says, you're going to the Navy, you're going to the Marines, you're going to the Army, and they got to me, and he said, what branch do you want to be in? I said, Marines. And luckily, he did put me in the Marines, but you didn't really have a choice.
Okay.
But he did, he did put me in the Marines.
Yeah. Well, the Marines had taken a lot of losses in the Pacific, and they needed bodies for what was to come.
That's exactly what I was.
So they were happy to take you for that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And so after you sign up, then what happens?
Well, we stayed in the hotel there in Detroit that night, and then we got on a train. I would call it a troop train, and from there we went right on down to Parris Island. And I don't really remember much about the trip. I don't remember staying overnight anywhere. To me, it was a all day, all night, 2 days and 2 night trip down to Parris Island.
Okay.
And
were you just in regular coaches where you're sitting on seats?
we were just in regular coaches, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And no sleeper cars. For
no
you?
sleeper cars or anything. You slept wherever you could sleep.
Okay.
And I don't remember now what time of the day or night we got there. I remember unloading, and I remember they told us to unload, stand in line, and we had a drill, what they call a drill sergeant, come out and start talking to us. And here again, there's something maybe I shouldn't say, but we all stood up. I went in with a fellow by the name of Bob Dove from Ludington, which I had known before I was in the service. And he was a little guy, not very big. And this big Polish, he was a Polish guy, great big guy, walked up and down in front of us, and he called us every name that he could think of and to get us in line. And he walked up Bob Dove. He hit Bob Dove in the stomach and curled him over. I thought, oh my gosh, this is not for me. But anyway.
Now, was that where you got off the train, or was that when you got to Parris Island?
No, that was at Parris Island when we got off the train. Well, we got off the train, I think we were bussed into Parris Island.
You'd have to take a bus there.
You had to take a bus to Parris Island when we got off the bus at Parris Island, where we took our boot. Right.
Yeah, so that welcome to the Marine Corps, and it was pretty much the same still in the Vietnam era.
Yeah.
You come out and you get abused by the drill sergeant.
Yeah.
That was the first exposure to life in the Marines.
Then the second exposure was that we got to our barracks, and they had a big 2x4 nailed to a post in there. He ripped that 2x4 off and had a big nail in the end of it, and he walked up and down the barracks and told us who we were and what we were going to do. And well, the first thing that I remember is saying, he says, whatever you do on the double. He said, I don't want to see anybody walk. When I tell you something, you run. You do it on the double. Everything is on the double. And they would, I don't know how much detail you want me to go into on this, but they would go into town on the weekend, and they would come back pretty well lubricated.
Right.
And it could be 2 o'clock in the morning, or any time they decided to come in. They would tell us to fall out, and sometimes it was locker box and skivvy drawers. So we had to pick up our locker box at the end of our bunk, take it outside, hold it, stand at attention until he decided to let us go back in. Another thing they would do when they come back on the weekend, and they had the bucket brigade. We always had a bucket to wash our clothes and stuff in. And we would take the bucket out, stand at attention, put it over our head, and holler attention until he decided that he had enough, and then we'd go back in again. Just all discipline.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Did you have the impression that all of the different groups who were training were getting the same treatment?
Yes, yeah. Everybody got the same abuse.
All right. And at the time, did you understand why they were doing these things?
No, not really, not really. But by the time I was finished with boot camp and then back out after the war was over with, then I realized what they were doing.
All right. Now, what actual training did you get in terms of military training while you were at Parris Island?
Well, mostly marching with the pack on our back. It was mostly physical training for us. We didn't get an awful lot. We got some bayonet training, and we got some climbing the fences and crawling on our bellies through the swamp and wading in the swamp up to our armpits, things like that. But it was mostly physical training. Now, we were supposed to have 6 weeks of basic training. We only got 4 weeks because of the rush. They wanted the invasion of Japan to start, and so we only had 4 weeks of training. So we didn't really have much more than just rugged physical training.
All right. And at that point, while you were still at Parris Island, were they telling you anything about what was going to happen to you? You were going to go to that. Did you know you were headed for the invasion of Japan?
No, we didn't know anything until the day before we were to board a ship. They told us that we were shipping out on a certain date. I don't remember exact date that was now, but they told us we were going to be shipping out and that we would have a general meeting the next day. So then they had a that to pack our bag. Told us what to have in our duffel bag, and that we would be shipping out the next day. And they had a big room they put us in, and they had all the papers if we wanted to change our beneficiary for life insurance. At that time, each of us had a $10,000 life insurance policy, and I had my mother as the beneficiary. And if anybody wanted to change it, because they came out and told us that there'd be a lot of us that won't come back. So if you want to change something, now's the time to do it. So then the next morning, then we went back to our barracks. Next morning, while we got all of our equipment on, went out to the parade field to get ready to board the bus to take us to the ship, and they said that our orders had been delayed. They didn't tell us that they were just delayed. So we had no idea. We were sequestered, so we didn't have any idea what was going on. So then I think it was 3 days later, they dropped the second bomb. And then they told us that there was something called an atomic bomb, and it was dropped twice on Japan, and that Japan had surrendered, and that the war was over with, and we didn't have to go anywhere. So I was really, really happy about that.
Okay.
Because, you stop and think, am I going to be a hero or am I going to be a coward? You really don't know until you get into it. You do what everybody else is doing. You're assigned a job, and you do the job. You don't think about anything else.
Okay. Now, during those few days where you were just there waiting and didn't know what was going to happen, what was the mood or the attitude of the guys you were with?
I don't really remember. I don't remember much of anything. We were wondering, what's going on, what happened, but I don't remember the mood of the group of people that I was with at all. It just kind of seemed like a blank to me right now.
So you were all focused on what might happen to you, and you weren't really talking to each other or doing other stuff.
Yeah.
Did they keep you busy during those days? Were you doing?
I don't think so. The march. Oh yeah. We went out on the parade field and marched. We kept our discipline up.
Okay. So now you've had your 4 weeks of training. You're supposed to ship out. You don't ship out. What do they do with you next? You've signed up for the Marine Corps. So now what happens?
Yeah. Well, they shipped me to Camp Lejeune. That we were on Parris Island. So I went into Camp Lejeune, and I was a projectionist when I was back in Wayland. There was a theater in Wayland. And, of course, I had to work because my dad had passed away. And I got a job in the theater as an usher because I was tall and I could look older than what I really was. So the guy there was the name of Naaman Frank was his name. And so he gave me a job. I had to go to the school and get a permit again because I was too young to work. And so then I did pretty good as an usher. So he trained me to run the projection machines upstairs in the projection booth. So when I went in the service, I had that as a projectionist. So I was put into special services. And they assigned me to bringing in the USO shows, I guess is what you might call them, but there was different. Oh, Louis Armstrong, and so I met quite a few celebrities on that. It was my job to bring them in, show them where their quarters were, show them where the stage was, and what facilities that we had for them to put the performance on. So that lasted for a little while, and then we had to requalify for the rifle range. So I requalified and I shot expert. And very, very difficult circumstances. We had, we were there for, I think, a week shooting. And I didn't know it at the time, but there was a team being organized to shoot a national competition for the Marine Corps. And they were looking for people that could shoot accurately. And I happened to shoot expert. And I shot at 1,000 yards, hit the bullseye. And so I was assigned to represent the on the team of the Eastern Division of the Marine Corps, and they shipped me to Quantico, Virginia, Washington D.C., and people from really good shooters from all over the United States are all in the service to shoot in this national competition.
Now, when you were a kid, did you hunt or shoot at all, or was this all new to you?
No, I hunted. Yeah, yeah. I was familiar with the shotgun and rifles and things.
Yeah, a shotgun might not help you.
Just 22s. Yeah.
But if you fired a rifle.
Well, no. Well, yes, shotgun does help you. It shows you how to carry a weapon and how to position it and what you should do with it. So shotgun does teach you, even though it was no good in the service.
Yeah, well, it wasn't a long-range weapon, though.
No,
I mean,
no.
in the sense of a rifle, you're not going to hit something at 1,000 yards with a shotgun.
No. So we shot with an M1, Browning.
Okay. And did you find that you were about as good as the other guys on your team?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I was surprised that, and we also had to shoot with a 45. So we had the M1 and the 45. Now, it's a funny thing because I don't remember where we ended up. My team ended up in the competition. I don't know whether we were first, second, third, or last. I don't remember.
And was the competition held at Quantico? Or was
it?
Okay.
Quantico. Every morning we would get up, we'd go shoot. By 9 o'clock we had to be on the range, ready to for the competition. We'd fire until noon, and then we were turned loose. We could do whatever we wanted to. We had free range of Washington. We could leave the base. We didn't have to have passes or anything. We could just do whatever we wanted to do.
Okay. So did you go into Washington then?
Oh yes, yes. I spent a lot of time. I had a friend that was my school teacher. Her sister lived in Washington, and I stayed at her apartments on the weekends. And she had a pass to all the streetcars because she worked there for the government. So she would give me her pass, and I could go anywhere I wanted to. It didn't cost me any money.
Okay. And were they giving servicemen free admission to various places?
No, I don't remember that. Most everything was free back then anyway. There wasn't any charges for anything. But I visited everything that was of any interest in Washington.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. About how long did you spend at Quantico?
Probably a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks.
Okay. All right.
Then I went back to Camp Lejeune, and there was a lot of people, Marines or servicemen coming back, and they put me in charge of a barracks, a 2-story barracks, and all these guys were coming back from overseas, and they had been fighting over there a long time. They had a point system then. And I think that I think if you had around 40, I don't remember now exactly, but 40-some points or something, why you got released and come back first, and then they went on down the line.
Right. Yeah.
And here I'm a 17-year-old kid. They put me in charge of a barracks with these Marines that have been overseas, crawling in the mud and fighting, killing people, and I am supposed to maintain the barracks, have these guys come out, fall out in the morning, have roll call, and then tell them to police the grounds and to polish the brass and to clean the heads. The head was the toilet. Mm-hmm. And I thought, this isn't going to work. The first time I tried to get somebody to do something, they told me where to go. Mm-hmm. And so I decided that, well, it's got to be done. So I did it. I picked up all the cigarette butts. I let the guys do whatever they wanted to do. They could. I was not in charge of them at all. So I picked up the cigarette butts. I polished the brass, and I cleaned the heads.
All right.
These guys had no business picking up cigarette butts. I realized that. I knew that. Instinctively, I said, well, this is not going to work. So I was there for a little while. And then they put me on guard duty on a little island just off the coast of North Carolina. Mm-hmm. And I was there for a little while, and I got an ingrown toenail. And so I couldn't walk at the guard duty. And so I went to the hospital, and I had pretty good duty in the hospital. I played that for as much as I could for a while, and then finally they released me. And then I got discharged right after that.
Okay, let's get back up to the early part where you were Did you actually work as a projectionist in Camp Lejeune?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And were you showing like Hollywood movies, or were training films?
No, Hollywood movies. These were the guys that were coming back from overseas, and they were stationed at that time. They called it tent camp, and there was 5 of us or 4 of us that they assigned to this one theater. We showed one movie a night. So we only, every 4th night, I had something to do. We didn't do anything at all during the day except played pinochle all day.
All right. Now you mentioned tent camp. Were you actually staying in tents at that point rather than barracks, or?
No, I was staying right at the theater.
Okay.
They had rooms at the theater. They had a big office and lounge and right there in the theater. So all I did was show a movie once every 4 days.
All right. Now, do you remember any other famous people who went through with the USO? You mentioned Louis Armstrong. Who else came through?
Well, Harry James came through, and then there was it wasn't Lana Turner, but there was another gal that came in there. That was the only 3 that I remember that had any real fame.
Okay. Now, while you were at Camp Lejeune, did you get to go off the base at all?
No. No, I don't remember. I don't remember going off base much at Camp Lejeune. I did go into Raleigh, North Carolina, a couple of times. We could get weekend passes if we wanted them, but.
Okay. Because I mean, you were in the South, and the South was still segregated at that point. Inside the camp, I mean, aside from a visitor like Louis Armstrong, everybody there probably was white.
Yeah.
But did you notice that?
No, we had colored people in my unit.
Okay.
Oh yeah. No, we had in boot camp. I had there was 2 people of color.
Were they black or?
Yeah. No. They were African Americans.
Okay. Okay. Because that's the kind of thing that isn't really expected, because black Marines would normally train on their own at Montford Point rather than Parris Island with the rest of you guys.
Yeah.
But then in your unit at Camp Lejeune, there were black Marines there too, or just when you were training?
I only remember, no, there was, because the fellow that I was in boot camp with was also at Camp Lejeune at the same time that I was, because I talked with him several times after that. So we were integrated. I didn't even realize that we were not integrated at that time.
Because you weren't officially integrated at that point, but it was happening. And I've actually heard that from a few other people in other service branches, that there was a little more of that kind of thing going on than you might expect.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, thinking over the time that you spent in the Marines, are there other memories that stand out for you?
When I was on guard duty, one day there was a snake. It had rings, red and white and black rings around it. It was about that long, and so I killed it. And there was a black guy that was the guardsman there that took care of the boilers and the furnace and stuff. So I took it in and I put it on my belly stick, and I took it in and showed it to him, and it was a poisonous, a very poisonous snake. I don't know, they called it a milk snake or
It could be, it was a coral snake maybe.
a coral snake or something, and he just about had a fit. But so, and then one other time, while I was on guard duty there, I got awful sleepy, and I thought, well, I'm just going to lay down for a minute. I just can't walk anymore. And of course, I had a sore foot at that time. And so I laid down and I thought, well, all right, I'll get up in a few minutes. I fell asleep. Luckily, the guy that was to relieve me, the sergeant did not come with him. He came by himself. And I wasn't at the post where I was supposed to be. So he came in the barracks, woke me up, and then took over. But if the sergeant had been, I'd probably still be in jail.
All right. Once you were out of the basic training and you were at Camp Lejeune, how did sergeants treat people?
Fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, entirely different.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was there. All right. But you wound up then essentially going out early. You were supposed to be in, do you think, for 2 full years or at least 18 months or something?
Yeah.
And so you go out there early. All right. So once they decide that they're done with you, what did you do after you're discharged? Did you go back home?
Oh yeah, I came back home, and then of
That's
course
where you high school.
I went to high school, and then I went back to the theater and worked in the theater.
Okay.
And I did odd jobs around. I worked for different carpenters and build houses and things like that as a laborer. But that wasn't something that I really. And I did work at General Motors for a little while, and then I decided that probably working at General Motors wasn't something I liked, because I stood at a machine. I put 2 parts together. I put it in a spot welder, and spot welded it, threw it over my shoulder. That's all I did all day long. And I guess my personality was not that type, so I decided that I better go to school. So I quit General Motors, and then I went to Parsons Business College in Kalamazoo. They had a private business school there, and I took up accounting, business administration, and accounting, and I did that after that.
Okay, so and then that was kind of your career from there?
No, I came back. I didn't really like accounting very much, and a friend of mine was a painter in Wayland. He did painting and decorating, and I worked with him for a while, and he decided that he was going to leave town. He didn't want to stay in Wayland anymore. He was going someplace else. So I took over all of his equipment, and I did painting and decorating in Wayland. And I took a job. There was an outfit called Kessler, Undies, and Woolies that had come into town. There was a Globe Knitting Works in Grand Rapids, and they made lollipop pants for women, cotton pants. They owned a factory there in Wayland. And the Kessler company came out of Chicago, and he bought the lollipop pant factory, moved his operation into Wayland. They manufactured baby clothes and sleepwear and underwear for infants. And I contracted a job for them painting their office. And I saw the salesman come in, and I heard what they were talking about and everything, and I thought, well, you know, I might like to try that. I like that better than painting, because painting was difficult, that sanding and scrubbing those walls and stuff. I didn't like that. So I asked Mr. Kessler if I could have a job as salesman. And he said, well, know if I had any experience, and I said, no. I don't have any experience. Well, he says, I can't hire you unless you have experience. So I thought, well, all right, how am I going to get experience? So I got a job with Fuller Brush Company.
Okay.
And I don't know how I even contacted them, got a hold of them, but I did. And I worked for them for a year, and I was very successful at it. I did pretty good at it.
Okay. Now, a lot of people today won't even know what Fuller Brush Company was or how they operated. I mean, I'm old enough to remember them.
Oh, really?
So what did they do?
Well, Fuller Brush Company they had a catalog, and they sold all very similar to Amway in many ways today. And they had salesmen that would go out and knock on doors. And at that time, you could knock on doors, and people were home, and you could talk to them. And we had what they called a vegetable brush that we gave to the housewife or whoever answered the door. And then we gave them a catalog and told them who we were and to pick out something, and then we would take an order, and then we would fill the order, bring the merchandise back the next week when we came through. So I worked for them for about a year. And so then I went back to Mr. Kessler, and I said, well, I have sales experience now. I've worked for Fuller Brush, and I'm one of their top people in our area. I said, will you now consider hiring me? Well, he says, we do need somebody in Michigan right now. Our salesman there is leaving. And he said, you can go out with my son tomorrow if you want to. Can you go tomorrow? I said, yeah, I'm ready to go. So I went out with his son. They had a sample case of goods, and we went out and we sold about $800 or $1,000 worth of stuff. And so the next day he says, well, you want to go out with my son again today? And I said, no. I said, I'll try it on my own. So I had a little plan figured out what I was going to do. And so I took the sample case out, and I went to a couple of small stores and told them that I was new with the business. I didn't really know whether the product was any good or not, but would they take a look at it and see if there was a product there that they could use. And they let me open up the case, and I sold them the goods. I come back with $1,500 worth of goods the next day. So he says, all right, he says, we'll hire you. So then, and I ended up being their either the number 1 or number 2 salesman. I was with them for 10 years. Oh.
Okay. All right. So you've done all sorts of stuff in your lifetime.
Yeah.
All right. And of course, this is primarily about your military career. So let's kind of circle back a little bit now to think about the time that you spent in the Marine Corps. What did you take out of that, or how did that affect you?
I think probably discipline, knowing what you want to do and how you want to do it, and to plan. Things don't just happen. You have to kind of plan as to what you're going to do and what's expected of you. Probably decency is the thing that probably stood out more than anything else. Be fair, and normally people will treat you fair if you're fair. But I think discipline is probably the biggest thing. Your weapon was a rifle, and it was called a rifle, and they said, do not call it a gun or you're in trouble. So I don't know, in one of our disciplines, or marching, some came up that I said, my gun something or other, and the drill sergeant picked up on that immediately, and I slept with 9 rifles that night. So that was my reward for calling my rifle my gun. Yeah, that's when I first got in, the mess hall, I went. I think it was in the evening meal, and I was still hungry because I was a pretty good eater, and so I went in, had my meal, and I went for seconds. And the sergeant that was in charge of the mess hall he said, are you a chow hound? I said, yes, sir. He said, well, get up on the table and bark. So there's about 300 people in the mess hall at the time, so I get up on the table and I barked. I never went back for seconds again.
All right. Now, I guess that led me to think a little bit. So in boot camp, when people messed up, did you normally get discipline like that, just doing something?
KP.
Okay.
Kitchen police, yeah, kitchen duty. Yeah, they called it KP at the time, and sometimes even if you didn't mess up, you got KP because they needed somebody, and they made it a kind of a round so that everybody got KP, and I did get KP for a week, or no, not a week, 3 days I think, and I was what they call the bread and butter guy, and all I had to do was make sure there was bread and butter on the table. So that was pretty good duty.
Okay, all right, but they didn't. So they weren't beating people up or doing any really abusive stuff at that point. No. Periods where you get stories like that sometimes coming out of Marine training, and
the only physical thing was hitting Bob Dove in the stomach, and Bob Dove just passed away here a few months ago.
All right.